Welcome to Night Lesson. Relax and learn along the way. Intro, a star above the Earth. Imagine you are looking into the clear night sky, far from the city lights. Among the countless sparkling stars that have stood in their place for eons, you see a bright point moving slowly but steadily across the firmament. It traces its path with a silent, unstoppable grace. It is not a star, nor is it an airplane. It is a home. For 15 years, the space station Mir was exactly that, a human outpost in space, a home that raced around the Earth 400 kilometers above our heads at the unfathomable speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour. A sunrise and a sunset every 90 minutes. Mir, this Russian word means both world and peace. Seldom has a name been so fitting and, at the same time, so ironic. For this floating world of metal and cables experienced anything but peace during its existence. It was a stage for incredible dramas, for triumphs and near-catastrophes that unfolded in the absolute silence of the vacuum. Let us dwell on this thought for a moment. In this capsule, surrounded by the deadly void of space, stories unfolded that put every earthly drama in the shade. Fires that filled the air with toxic smoke, a collision with an unmanned cargo ship that tore a module to pieces and nearly doomed the station, constant computer failures, and leaks. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Soviet Union, which had once built it with such pride, was disintegrating, and the flow of money had almost completely dried up. And in the midst of it all, people lived and worked, cosmonauts and astronauts, who kept their station alive with infinite resourcefulness and an iron will. The Mir was far more than just a collection of modules. It became a living symbol of human perseverance, of the genius of Soviet engineering, and of the irrepressible drive to survive in space even under the most adverse circumstances. The story of the Mir is not just the chronicle of a technical project. It is the story of a machine with a soul that simply refused to give up. Chapter 1. Born in the Cold War. Imagine a silent, infinite expanse, the deep black velvet of the cosmos, broken only by distant, twinkling stars. In this absolute silence, high above the blue shimmer of our planet, a story of human ingenuity and perseverance began. It is the story of the space station Mir, whose name in Russian means both peace and world, a name full of hope in a time of division. Its roots run deep into the history of the Soviet space program. Long before the Mir became a symbol in the sky, the Soviet Union had already paved the way for life in orbit. It all began in 1971 with Salyut 1, the very first space station of humankind, a modest but revolutionary first step. It was followed by other stations in the Salyut series, such as Salyut 6 and 7, which became increasingly complex and durable. They were the testing grounds, the workshops in space, where cosmonauts learned to live and work in weightlessness for months on end. But all these stations were just the prologue. The Mir was to outshine everything that had come before, to open a new chapter. Let us travel back in time, to February 20th, 1986. On this cold winter day, the Kazakh steppe trembled. From the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the legendary spaceport, a mighty proton rocket rose into the sky. At its tip, it carried the heart of the future station, the core module. A massive cylinder, weighing 20 tons and over 13 meters long, packed with life support systems, computers, and a small living area. But what was truly revolutionary about this module was its design. At its front end was not just a single docking port, but a spherical docking node with a total of 6 docking ports. One facing forward, one backward, and 4 more radially on the sides. Just imagine that. It was not just a space station sent into orbit. It was the foundation of a house that had yet to be built. The Mir was designed from the ground up as a modular station, the first of its kind. Like a modular construction set, new rooms, new laboratories, and new functions could be added one by one. Each of these 6 ports was an open door to a greater future, an invitation to the engineers on Earth to let the station grow over time. The birth of the Mir came at a time of great upheaval and tragedy. Just a few weeks earlier, on January 28, 1986, the world had witnessed the Challenger disaster. The explosion of the American space shuttle shortly after launch had not only cost 7 lives, but had also plunged the U.S. space program into a deep crisis, paralyzing it for years. And just 2 months after the launch of the Mir core module, on April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl disaster occurred in Ukraine, shaking confidence in Soviet technology. In this year of extremes, between American tragedy and Soviet meltdown, the Mir became a quiet but powerful symbol of the unstoppable pursuit of progress. And so began the slow, patient construction in orbit. Over a whole decade, the station grew piece by piece. In 1987, the first module, Kvant-1, arrived. It was an astrophysics laboratory equipped with X-ray telescopes to peer deep into the secrets of galaxies and black holes. It docked at the rear port of the core module, extending the station like a new segment of a spine. 2 years later, in 1989, Kvant-2 followed. This module brought crucial new capabilities. It contained a spacious airlock for spacewalks, improved life support systems, and large, extendable solar panels to satisfy the station's growing hunger for energy. In 1990, the Krikalev module was attached. Its focus was on materials research. In its special furnaces, perfect crystals could be grown in weightlessness, impossible to produce on Earth. Even more important, however, was a special, reinforced docking port designed for the American space shuttle, a vision of cooperation long before it became a reality. Then, after a pause caused by the collapse of the Soviet Union, the expansion continued. In 1995, the Spectre module was added. It was packed with scientific instruments, including many experiments from the USA. It was the first visible sign of the new partnership in space. The final piece of the puzzle followed in 1996 with Priroda, the module for Earth observation. With its cameras and sensors, it looked back at our planet, studying oceans, atmosphere, and forests, and helping to better understand the changes in our own world. With the arrival of Priroda, the great work was complete. The single-core module had become a sprawling complex. A huge structure, weighing almost 120 tons, majestically floating through orbit. Its interior volume was 350 cubic meters, as much space as in a small single-family house. And its widely spread solar wings generated 35 kilowatts of electrical power, enough to supply all the experiments, computers, and life support systems with energy. The Mir was now larger and more complex than anything humanity had ever put into space before. It was a labyrinth of corridors, hatches, and laboratories, a floating home for the people who would live and research there. It was a testament to what is possible when you patiently assemble one component after another with a grand vision. And as it traced its orbits up there in the silence, it waited to be filled with life, work, and the stories of countless cosmonauts and astronauts who would call it home. Chapter 2. Life Among the Stars. Imagine opening your eyes not in a bed that stands firmly on the ground, but floating in the silence of the cosmos. Your awakening aboard the space station Mir is a gentle glide from sleep into a world without up or down. Your sleeping bag is not a place of comfort on a mattress, but a functional shell attached with straps to a wall of the living module, so you don't drift away in the night. The first thing you see are not the familiar walls of a room, but a labyrinth of cables, hoses, and instruments that run through the entire station like a metallic nervous system. The day begins without the familiar feeling of gravity pulling you to your feet. Every morning is an act of disciplined routine. Breakfast comes not from a stove, but from tubes and specially preserved cans. A paste of quark and nuts, rehydrated scrambled eggs, or a piece of bread designed not to create crumbs that could float around and damage sensitive equipment. Even drinking is an art. Water and juice are sucked from sealed pouches with a straw to prevent the liquid from escaping in floating globules. After the sparse meal, a strictly regimented schedule begins, dictated by the control centers on Earth. Each day is a mixture of scientific experiments, meticulous maintenance work, and caring for one's own body. You might spend the morning observing the growth of crystals and weightlessness, performing a complicated repair on a life support system, or taking samples for biological studies. The Mir was a flying laboratory, but also an old house that needed constant care. Cosmonauts often described it as a mix between a state-of-the-art research institute and a cluttered warehouse hurtling through space. Over the years, an incredible amount of equipment, tools, and personal items had accumulated, stowed in every free corner. Moving around was a careful maneuvering through narrow passages, a constant effort not to hit your head against a valve or a protruding instrument. Weightlessness, that initial marvel that fills every newcomer with childlike wonder, becomes the norm. Floating is no longer magic, but a physical reality with its own rules and pitfalls. Tools let go for a moment begin a slow, inexorable journey through the module, only to reappear later in an unreachable corner. A drop of water that escapes from a pouch trembles and quivers in the air like a tiny, living jewel until it is caught by the air circulation. But this fascinating world has its downsides. The human body, adapted to Earth's gravity over millions of years, begins to rebel. Without the constant load, muscles atrophy and bone density decreases. To counteract this deterioration, 2 hours of intensive exercise on special equipment are mandatory every day. A treadmill with tension straps that pull you down, or a stationary bike you have to strap yourself to. The fluids in the body redistribute, rising to the head and creating the so-called moon face, a slightly puffy countenance that many space travelers experience in the first few weeks. Personal hygiene becomes a logistical challenge. There was no shower. An early prototype on a predecessor station had proven too cumbersome. Instead, there are moist towelettes, special soaps that work without water, and dry shampoo. The toilet is a masterpiece of Soviet engineering, a complex device that uses suction to move waste where it belongs. In the midst of these extreme conditions, a record was set that redefined the limits of human endurance. On January 8, 1994, the physician and cosmonaut Valery Polyakov entered the Mir for a special kind of mission. His goal was to prove that a human could survive a journey to Mars. As his colleagues came and went, he stayed. He orbited the Earth more than 7,000 times, saw countless sunrises and sunsets, and endured the relentless monotony of daily life in space. Only on March 22, 1995, after an incredible 437 days and 18 hours, did he return to Earth. His uninterrupted stay in space remains a record to this day. When the landing capsule touched down on the Kazakh steppe, he refused to be carried, as was customary. Supported by helpers, but on his own 2 feet, he walked the few meters to a waiting chair. His first words, recorded for posterity, were a triumphant look to the future. We can fly to Mars. This iron will was essential for survival. The psychological strain was immense. The endless isolation, thousands of kilometers from any other human being, the constant confinement with the same few faces, and the danger that lurked in every crackle and every alarm tone. Some cosmonauts reported periods of depression, of conflicts that inevitably arose in the tense atmosphere. Others found a new form of spirituality. For hours, they could float in the cupola module and just watch the Earth glide by beneath them. A glowing blue marble, silent and majestic in the infinite blackness. A sight that made one's own existence seem both tiny and infinitely precious. Let us linger on this image for a moment, the sight of our home planet from a distance, before we continue our journey and delve deeper into the stories of those who ventured even further from it. Chapter 3. The Last Soviet Citizen. Imagine you are floating high above the Earth, a silent observer of a blue marble gently turning beneath you. Billions of stories unfold on its surface, yet none reach you, unless a fleeting burst of radio static brings you fragments of distant realities. This must be how it felt for Sergei Krikalev, the cosmonaut whose entire life, whose homeland, was rearranging itself below him, while he himself was stuck in orbit, trapped between the stars and a changing world. Let us pause for a moment and recall the year 1991. The world was on the eve of great changes, but for Sergei Krikalev, a young and talented flight engineer, May 19, 1991, was a day of triumph and departure. On that bright day, the Soyuz TM-12 mission lifted off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, that legendary launch pad in the vast steppe of Kazakhstan that had sent generations of Soviet space travelers into infinity. On board were the experienced Commander Anatoly Artsebarsky, Krikalev himself as flight engineer, and the British astronaut Helen Sharman, who became the first Briton to cross the threshold into space. Their mission seemed clearly defined: 5 months of scientific work, maintenance, and life aboard the space Station Mir, the proud symbol of Soviet engineering in orbit. 5 months, a manageable period of time that would allow Krikalev to gain valuable experience before returning to his family on Earth. However, their time together as a trio was to be short-lived. Helen Sharman, whose stay was planned from the outset as a short guest mission, returned to Earth after just 8 days, along with the previous crew aboard Soyuz TM-11. Artsebarsky and Krikalev remained behind and began their 5-month long-duration mission. From the window of the Mir, a window that offered an unparalleled view of the entire globe, Krikalev could admire the breathtaking beauty of his home planet. Blue oceans, green continents, the patterns of cloud formations that looked as if they were painted, a constant reminder of the fragility and splendor of life. But over time, these sublime impressions were mixed with unsettling radio messages from ground control, words that carried an immense weight in their brevity. August 19, 1991, marked such a turning point. While Krikalev was carrying out his routine tasks, far below him, tanks rolled across Red Square in Moscow. A coup attempt against Mikhail Gorbachev, the then president of the Soviet Union, shook the country to its foundations. A group of hardliners tried to seize control and reverse the reforms. For us, it came as a complete surprise. Krikalev would later state in interviews with an almost incredulous melancholy. The information reached them only in fragments, filtered through the cautious communication channels of ground control, which was itself in chaos. Imagine the isolation, the feeling of powerlessness, when you are tens of thousands of kilometers away and the history of your country is being written in real time, without you being able to intervene or even fully understand. Every new radio message, every hesitant word from ground control, was like another drop filling the barrel of uncertainty. In the midst of this uncertainty, the planned crew change took place in October 1991. Commander Artsebarsky returned to Earth as scheduled with Soyuz TM-12, back to a country in turmoil. His successor arrived with Soyuz TM-13, Alexander Volkov, born in Halyuka in the Ukrainian SSR. Ukraine had declared its independence just a few weeks earlier, immediately after the failed coup. Volkov's hometown was already in a country that had seceded from the Soviet Union when he left Earth. For Krikalev, however, there was no replacement. His relief crewman had not been given a seat aboard Soyuz TM-13. Together, the two watched as the capsule with Artsebarsky slowly disappeared towards Earth, 2 Soviet cosmonauts who would soon no longer be Soviet cosmonauts. The weeks and months went by, and the Earth continued to turn tirelessly. For Krikalev and his comrades aboard the Mir, the view below became a mixture of longing and worry. Then came December 25, 1991, a day that for many in the Western world is a festive day of reflection and joy, but for the Soviet Union marked the final break. Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. Just one day later, on December 26th, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. The once mighty Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, a colossus of world politics, no longer existed. From that moment on, Sergei Krikalev circled the Earth 16 times a day, every single day, representing a country that no longer existed. He was the last Soviet citizen, a living relic of a bygone era, whose existence in space was a paradoxical metaphor for the collapse on Earth. The dissolution of the Soviet Union was not just a political event, but a profound societal upheaval that also had a massive impact on space travel. Russia, as the largest successor state and heir to the Soviet space program, suddenly faced immense financial difficulties. The budget had shrunk, the economy was suffering from hyperinflation, and the once lavish funds for space travel were rapidly drying up. In addition, there was another, no less serious problem. The Baikonur Cosmodrome, the cradle of Soviet space travel, was no longer on Soviet territory, but in the newly independent Republic of Kazakhstan. Suddenly, political negotiations and payments were required to secure the use of the facilities. In this chaotic time, the coveted seats on the Soyuz flights to and from the Mir became a valuable commodity. They were sold to paying foreign cosmonauts and astronauts who were willing to invest millions of dollars for a place in space. This meant that there was simply no room, no budget, and no way to send a replacement for Krikalev to the Mir. He was stuck. The personal tragedy behind these geopolitical upheavals was incomparably greater for Sergei Krikalev. On Earth, his 9-month-old daughter was waiting, a small life growing up without him, while he could only see the infinite blackness of space and the distant blue sphere. His wife, Elena, also worked in the space program, in ground control, and had to deliver the cascading news to her husband over the radio. She spoke of skyrocketing prices, of a salary that became more worthless by the day, making the family's survival a daily challenge. The city where he lived and where his family resided, Leningrad, suddenly bore its old, Tsarist name again, St. Petersburg. Everything he knew, everything he had thought was stable, was changing under his feet, while he himself floated in a seemingly timeless bubble in the cosmos. Every radio message must have been like a sting, a painful reminder of what he was missing and the worries that plagued his family on Earth. The originally planned 5 months eventually turned into 311 days, almost a full year. A period of time that put the resilience of the human body and mind in space to a harsh test. The Mir was a technological marvel, but even it was not optimally designed for such an extended mission, and Krikalev strained resources and psychological well-being to the limit. When he finally got the chance to return to Earth in March 1992, he was a shadow of his former self. Pale from the long time without sunlight, weakened by weightlessness, sweaty and exhausted, he landed near the city of Arkalyk. But even this return was marked by the irony of fate. Arkalyk, once part of the Soviet Union, was now in the independent Republic of Kazakhstan. The last Soviet citizen had finally arrived on Earth, in a country that hadn't even existed when he launched. The world he returned to was a different, new one. His homeland, as he knew it, was gone, and he had to find his way in a completely new reality. But Sergei Krikalev did not give up. His story is not just one of melancholy and loss, but also one of indomitable human strength and adaptability. He became a symbol of Russian space travel, a bridge builder in a new era of international cooperation. Just 2 years after his forced extension on the Mir, he returned to space, this time as the first Russian cosmonaut on an American space shuttle, the STS-60 mission in 1994. It was the beginning of a new partnership, a new era in which former rivals worked together. Krikalev played a crucial role in the construction of the International Space Station, ISS, another symbol of global cooperation and humanity's longing for the stars. For his services and his extraordinary career, he was named the first hero of the Russian Federation. In total, he spent an incredible 803 days in space, a period that made him one of the most experienced space travelers in history. The story of Sergei Krikalev is a touching reminder of how quickly the world can change under our feet and how major political upheavals often influence the fate of individuals in unexpected ways. It tells of a man who, in the face of profound change and personal hardship, fulfilled his duty, showing a strength that reached beyond the confines of Earth. His melancholy over the lost country he represented in space is mixed with a deep respect for his perseverance and his ability to redefine himself again and again. It is a story that teaches us that even in the most chaotic times, the human spirit has the ability to adapt, find new paths, and rise above itself to reach for the stars. And so, as we let this calming story of Krikalev resonate, imagine the stars shining above us, witnesses to all our human stories, both the small and the very large. Chapter 4. The Year Everything Went Wrong. Let us continue our journey through time and return to a moment that has been burned into the collective memory of space travel. The year is 1997. The space station Mir, once the shining symbol of Soviet engineering, has grown old. It is a veteran of orbit, a floating labyrinth of modules, cables, and life support systems that has been inhabited almost continuously for over a decade. Imagine the silence that reigns up here. A soft, constant hum of fans and pumps, forming the station's heartbeat. Outside, beyond the thin metal hull, the infinite, silent black of the cosmos, punctuated by the brilliant blue and white of the Earth majestically gliding below. In this floating sanctuary, 6 people are living and working in February 1997. The Russian commander Vasily Tsibliev, an experienced cosmonaut with a steady hand. His flight engineer, Alexander Lazutkin, whose job it is to keep the myriad systems of the aging station running. And the American astronaut Jerry Lininger, a doctor and researcher, who is on board as part of the new cooperation between the U.S. and Russia. 3 other researchers share the limited space with them. It is a life in close quarters, a choreography of efficiency, but also a community that has grown together in the face of isolation. The evening of February 23rd is routine. The day's work is done, meals have been shared, conversations held. Slowly, the crew prepares for the rest period. But on this night, the deceptive tranquility of the Mir is to be shattered in a dramatic way. Imagine the Kvant, one module, one of the oldest parts of the station. Inside is an oxygen generator, a so-called solid fuel generator, about the size of a small coffee can. These devices are a kind of chemical candle that releases oxygen in an emergency or to support the main systems. They are a proven, but also potent, technology. On this evening, one of these units is activated. But something is different. Instead of the usual, controlled hiss, there is an ominous jolt. A deafening alarm shatters the silence. A bright, orange-red flash of light illuminates the module. A hissing jet of flame, almost 2 meters long, shoots out of the oxygen generator, like a furious dragon awakened in the confined space. Sparks and splashes of molten metal spray in all directions, pattering against the walls and emitting a pungent, metallic smell. For the 6 inhabitants of the Mir, a race against time begins. The fire is not just an immediate threat due to its heat. It consumes the precious oxygen and spews dense, black smoke that spreads with alarming speed in weightlessness. Spherical clouds of smoke, laced with toxic fumes, billow out of the Kvant, one module, and waft through the narrow corridors. Within seconds, the crew can no longer see their hands in front of their faces. The station's lights become diffuse spots in an impenetrable, stuffy fog. Instinctively, the astronauts reach for their gas masks. But in the panic and darkness, even this simple action becomes an ordeal. Some of the masks do not work properly. Others are tied so tightly to the walls that precious seconds are lost before they can be torn loose. Imagine the desperation, fumbling with stubborn straps with numb fingers, while your lungs scream for clean air and your eyes burn in the toxic smoke. The fire is raging directly on the path to one of the two Soyuz capsules, the station's lifeboats. If the fire could not be brought under control, half the crew would be trapped. Vasily Tsibliev and Alexander Lazutkin fight their way through the smoke to the source of the fire with fire extinguishers. They pull the triggers, and a gush of foam pours over the glowing generator. But the fire seems unimpressed. On the ground, in the Russian control center in Krikalev near Moscow, there is a tense silence. The telemetry data is patchy, communication is faltering. Later, the official report will state, the fire lasted 90 seconds. The truth, known only to the crew, is different. For 14 endless minutes, they fight in the darkness and chaos, struggling for every breath, until the chemical fuel in the generator finally burns out and the flame is extinguished. The official report will also state, the cosmonauts heroically extinguished the fire. The truth is, they survived it. As the smoke slowly clears, the extent of the devastation is revealed. The walls are charred black. The smell of burnt plastic and metal hangs heavy in the air. The crew is exhausted. Their faces are blackened with soot, but they are alive. There are no serious injuries. But something fundamental has changed. The unwavering trust in the aging Mir, in their floating home, has been deeply shaken. The station that was supposed to protect them had turned against them. The weeks after the fire are an ordeal. Let's pause for a moment with the crew, who are now living with the aftermath. Cleaning the station is a tedious job. An oily, sooty layer has settled everywhere, which must be carefully removed. But the problems are more than just superficial. The aging technology begins to groan under the weight of the years and the recent trauma. In March, the primary oxygen generator, the electron system, repeatedly fails. The crew has to fall back on the remaining solid fuel generators, the same type that caused the fire. Each activation is now associated with a feeling of unease. Then the cooling system begins to fail. One of the main lines is leaking ethylene glycol, a toxic, sweet-smelling liquid whose fumes contaminate the air and cause headaches. Again, the astronauts have to live with an invisible danger in an already stressed environment. As if that weren't enough, an unmanned Progress cargo ship misses its target during a docking maneuver and drifts past the station back into space, taking urgently needed supplies with it. Each of these events is manageable on its own, but in some, they paint a picture of a station on the verge of collapse. And then comes the 25th of June, 1997. The day the Mir was to suffer its heaviest blow. On this day, a manual docking test is on the schedule. Another unmanned cargo ship, the Progress M-34, is supposed to dock with the station. But this time, it is not to be done automatically. Commander Tsibliev is to pilot the ship by remote control from the station, an exercise to save on the cost of the expensive automatic system. He sits at a console, in front of him a screen showing the image from a camera on the freighter. In his hands, he holds two joysticks with which he controls the thrusters of the multi-ton ship. Imagine this scene. Tsibliev, focused, his movements precise. Next to him stand Lazutkin and the newly arrived American astronaut Michael Foale, who has replaced Jerry Lininger. They alternate between looking at the screen and out the station window to watch the approaching freighter. But the telemetry, which should show Tsibliev the exact distance and speed, fails. He is flying virtually blind, relying only on the visual image from the camera. When the Progress freighter finally emerges from the station's blind spot and becomes visible through the window, an icy shock runs through the crew. It is much too fast, and it is moving strangely. It will later turn out that the freighter was improperly loaded. Its center of gravity had shifted. It does not respond to Tsibliev's control inputs as it should. It seems to be hurtling unstoppably towards the station. Tsibliev desperately tries to slow the freighter down, to steer it aside, but it is too late. The crew can only watch helplessly. With a terrifying, metallic force, the Progress freighter rams one of the large, delicate solar panels of the Spectre module. The panel buckles like cardboard, but the freighter does not stop. It bounces off the solar panel and slams with full force directly into the outer hull of the Spectre module itself. A dull, echoing boom shakes the entire station. The Mir, this huge structure of metal, begins to tumble, sent into a slow, uncontrolled spin. Inside, Michael Foale immediately senses that something has gone catastrophically wrong. He feels a drop in pressure in his ears, a telltale pop that every diver and every pilot fears. It is the unmistakable sign that the station is losing air. A hole, a breach in its protective hull. A new, shrill alarm sounds. The indicators confirm Foale's feeling. The air pressure throughout the station is dropping rapidly. They have only minutes before the pressure drops so low that they cannot survive without spacesuits. In a feverish rush, they must find and isolate the leak. The indicators point to the Spectre module. The only solution is to seal the hatch to this module and shut it off from the rest of the station. But dozens of cables and lines run through the open hatch, the lifelines that supply the module with power and data. Among them are the main power cables from the solar panels, which supply a large part of the energy for the Mir. There is no time to dismantle them properly. With knives and pliers, in a desperate act of self-preservation, Lazutkin and Foale cut the thick bundles of cables. Sparks fly. Then they throw all their strength against the heavy hatch to close and lock it. The moment the last latch engages, it becomes quiet. The alarm falls silent. The pressure stabilizes. They have done it. They have saved the station and their lives. But the price is high. The Spectre module, a modern research laboratory and the private sleeping quarters of Michael Foale, is lost forever. With it are his personal belongings, important scientific experiments, and, worst of all, almost half of the Mir's entire power supply. The station continues to spin uncontrollably. The remaining solar panels can no longer orient themselves towards the sun. The batteries drain. The Mir grows dark and cold. In the following days and weeks, the crew works tirelessly to stabilize their wounded home. They use the thrusters of the docked Soyuz capsule to stop the spin. In risky spacewalks, they try to lay new power connections to the outside of the sealed hatch. The physical and psychological strain is immense. Commander Tsibliev, who blames himself for the collision, develops a heart arrhythmia. The station's computers repeatedly fail. In the end, they manage to stabilize the Mir to about 70% of its original power. It is now a different station, a darker, colder, and quieter station. The Spectre module remains a silent, depressurized appendage, an eternal reminder of the day the universe knocked on their door. The year 1997 had demanded everything from the Mir and its crew, taking them to the brink of the abyss and back again. The station was badly scarred, but it was alive. And with it, the people who called it home, now bound by an experience that no one on Earth could ever comprehend. Chapter 5. East Meets West, the Shuttle-Mir program. Let us pause for a moment in our journey and look at the political landscape on Earth as it appeared at the beginning of the 1990s. The walls that had divided the world for so long had fallen. A cold, decades-long conflict, which had also fueled the race to space, was coming to an end. And with it, mistrust slowly gave way to a new, fragile curiosity. What if the old rivalries were set aside and forces were joined? In orbit, high above the changing nations, the Mir floated as a symbol of the old era, a triumphant, but also lonely, Russian outpost in space. At the same time, The American space shuttles were launching and landing, technological marvels that were, however, designed only for short missions. Imagine how, in the minds of some visionaries at NASA and at Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, a thought began to germinate that would have been dismissed as pure fantasy just a few years earlier. What if these two programs were brought together? What if the American shuttle, the truck of orbit, were to visit the Russian space station, the first permanent home in space? In 1993, this bold idea became a reality. In a historic agreement, the Shuttle-Mir program was sealed. A new era of cooperation had begun. The first handshake in space took place in June 1995. The Space Shuttle Atlantis, a brilliant white space glider, approached the Mir slowly and majestically. For the Mir crew, who were accustomed to the arrival of the smaller, utilitarian Soyuz and Progress capsules, the sight must have been breathtaking. There, floating outside their windows, was a winged ship as large as a passenger airplane, a symbol of their former competitor. After a perfect docking maneuver, the hatches opened. The American commander Robert Hoot Gibson and the Russian commander Vladimir Deserov shook hands. Floating in weightlessness, the boundary between two worlds, two systems, two philosophies, momentarily erased. Between 1995 and 1998, this maneuver became routine. American shuttles visited the Mir 11 times. But it was about more than just short visits. 7 American astronauts stayed on board for long periods, becoming full-fledged members of the Russian crews. Among them was Shannon Lucid, who in 1996 lived on the Mir for 188 days, setting a new record for the longest continuous time in space for a woman. She experienced the daily routine, the scientific experiments, but also the challenges of living on an aging space station. And these challenges revealed a fascinating cultural difference. American astronauts were used to the precisely planned and orderly procedures of NASA. Every tool had its place. Every problem had a predefined protocol. The Russian space program, on the other hand, had become an art of improvisation out of necessity. The astronaut Michael Foale, whom we have already met in connection with the collision, once aptly described life on the Mir as MacGyver in space. When something broke, and that happened frequently, they didn't wait for days for a spare part from Earth. They repaired it with what they had: wire, tape, ingenuity, and a deep knowledge of the systems. It was a pragmatic, tireless style, born from the experience that up there, you are on your own and simply have to keep going. For the Americans, it was a lesson in flexibility and resilience. This cooperation also had a very tangible financial side. NASA paid Russia around $100 million a year to participate in the program. This money was a lifeline for the Russian space program, which was struggling for survival after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was precisely this financial support that made it possible to complete and launch the last 2 major modules of the Mir, Spectre and Prirota. Without the Americans, the Mir might have remained an unfinished torso, a monument that never reached its full size. But the real, deeper purpose of the Shuttle-Mir program was to look to the future. It was a full-scale dress rehearsal. Here, 2 completely different spacefaring cultures learned to work with each other. Engineers on Earth had to develop common protocols for communication and safety. Astronauts and cosmonauts had to find a common language, not just verbally, but also in their technical procedures. A universal docking adapter was developed and tested, allowing the different systems to connect. All these experiences, the successes as well as the crises, were priceless. They formed the foundation of knowledge and trust on which the greatest construction project in human history would be built: the International Space Station, the ISS. The legacy of the Mir lived on directly in this new project. One name is inextricably linked to it: Sergei Krikalev, the same cosmonaut who had flown into space as the last citizen of the Soviet Union and returned as a citizen of Russia. In December 1998, Just a few years after his long mission on the Mir, he flew again, this time aboard the American Space Shuttle Endeavour. The mission was designated STS-88, and its goal was to connect the first American module, Unity, with the first Russian module, Zarya, which was already in orbit. After the robotic arms joined the two modules, Krikalev and NASA astronaut Robert Cabana had the honor of being the first people to open the hatch and float into the newly created International Space Station. The spirit of the Mir, the spirit of endurance and international cooperation, had found a new, even larger home. The torch had been passed. Chapter 6, The Final Orbit. Imagine the late 1990s dawning. High above the Earth, in the silent blackness of space, a tired giant traces its orbits. It is the space station Mir. Once a shining symbol of the human spirit of exploration, it has now reached the end of its strength. It was designed for a lifespan of 5 years, a bold but limited dream. But it defied all expectations and endured for 15 years, a faithful home to generations of cosmonauts and astronauts. But these years have left their mark. The once pristine walls, which could tell so many stories of scientific breakthroughs and human cooperation, now show the signs of time. In hidden, damp places, a fine mold has formed, a silent, organic enemy in this high-tech environment. The complex systems, the heart and circulation of the station, are failing more and more frequently. A quiet hiss here, an unexpected alarm there. Coolant, vital for the sensitive electronics, forms tiny, floating pearls in weightlessness, a silent indication of leaking pipes. The Mir is like an old, venerable ship that has weathered countless storms, but whose planks are now rotten and its sails tattered. Down on Earth, a debate rages, marked by nostalgia and pragmatism. Should the Mir live on? There are passionate voices fighting for its preservation. Private investors form an American-Russian company called Mir Corp. They have a vision to transform the aging station into a commercial laboratory, perhaps even the first hotel in orbit. For a brief, hopeful moment, the plan seems to be working. Mir Corp actually sends up one last crew to reactivate the station and prepare it for the future. But reality is relentless. The maintenance costs are astronomical, and in the end, the money runs out. Russia faces a painful decision, a fork in the road at the edge of the cosmos, the aging Mir or the brand new International Space Station, ISS. Both at the same time are not affordable. The decision is made in favor of the future, and the fate of the Mir is sealed. On June 16, 2000, the day of departure arrives. The last crew, cosmonauts Sergei Zalyodin and Alexander Kalery, carry out the final necessary tasks. They put the station into an automatic mode, a final act of care. Every movement is slow, deliberate. A last look through the cupola window at the passing Earth, the blue marble they have watched from above for so long. Then they close the hatch between their Soyuz spacecraft and the Mir. The sound of the closing mechanism echoes through the silence. A soft hiss as the last bit of air escapes. And then the station is finally unmanned, a silent monument drifting alone through the void. 9 months later, on March 23, 2001, the last day in the life of the Mir has come. It is not an uncontrolled crash, not a chaotic end. It is a carefully planned, dignified funeral from the sky. An unmanned Progress cargo ship has docked with the station. It has not come to bring supplies, but to accompany the Mir on its final journey. On command from the ground station, the Progress ship fires its thrusters. A first, gentle push that slows the orbit of the huge station. The Mir begins its long, inexorable descent. 2 more braking maneuvers follow, precise and calculated, to guide the station into the atmosphere exactly over the most remote place on Earth, the South Pacific, far from any inhabited island. In the control center in Korolyov, a suburb of Moscow, an almost palpable silence reigns. Men and women, Engineers and technicians who have dedicated half their professional lives to this station stare intently at the monitors. The columns of numbers show altitude, speed, the state of the systems. But they see more than just data. They see memories of long night shifts, of solved problems, of the voices of the cosmonauts greeting them from above. No one speaks. When the telemetry indicates that the Mir is entering the upper layers of the atmosphere, some see tears gathering in the corners of their colleagues' eyes. They are not tears of sadness, but of deep respect and farewell to an era. For a brief moment, the night over the Pacific becomes day. From the Fiji Islands, people watch a spectacular show in the sky. The Mir, the 120-ton structure of metal, cables, and glass, burns up in a breathtaking fireball. Like a gigantic shooting star, it leaves a glowing trail of plasma and fire behind it. The heat of friction tears the station into thousands of individual parts that spray like sparks. For $0.2 billion, 15 years of human history in space dissolve into light and ash. The few pieces of debris that survive this fiery re-entry rain down with a soft hiss into a vast, empty area of the ocean, where they sink into the darkness of the deep sea. The numbers that remain tell a story of incredible success. 86 cosmonauts and astronauts from 12 different nations had called the Mir home. The station had orbited the Earth over 86,000 times, and more than 23,000 scientific experiments were conducted on board, forever changing our knowledge of life in space and of our own planet. The final orbit of the Mir was not an end, but a transition. The metal had turned to ash, the ash scattered in the ocean. But the knowledge, the experiences, and the indomitable human will to expand the boundaries of the possible remained. They were just waiting to live on in a new home in the sky. Outro: what Mir taught us. And so ends the story of the Mir, that improbable refuge among the stars. Let us dwell for a moment in the silence it has left behind. The Mir was never perfect. It was not a shining ideal from a glossy space travel brochure. Imagine what it was like inside. A constant hum of life support, the cramped corridors covered with cables and equipment. It was loud. It was sometimes messy. It was full of problems. But that is exactly what made it so human. It was a living, breathing outpost where real people solved very real problems with ingenuity and courage. What did this station, whose name means both world and peace, really teach us? It gave us the fundamental certainty that we humans can live in space, not just for fleeting days or weeks, but for months and years. Valery Polyakov's journey, those 437 days in weightlessness, was more than just a record. It was the scientific proof that the human body can survive a journey to Mars and back. Mir was the bridge to other worlds. It also taught us that former enemies can become friends in orbit. The images of American shuttles gently docking with a Russian space station were an infinitely more powerful symbol of peace than any treaty on Earth. The Mir was the place where the Cold War finally came to an end. Its DNA, its legacy, lives on today in the International Space Station, the ISS. The concept of assembling a station in space piece by piece, module by module, the protocols of international cooperation, the invaluable knowledge about the psychological and physical challenges of long-duration missions. All of these are direct lessons we learned on the shoulders of the Mir. The ISS is the child that could never have grown up without the experiences of its mother, Mir. And perhaps most importantly, the Mir taught us something about ourselves. It taught us that we do not give up, even when the air literally runs out and the fire takes our breath away. That we improvise, repair, and carry on with tape, with wit, and with an indomitable will. A space station built for 5 years was able to survive for 15 because people cared for it as if it were a part of them. The Mir is just one of the many fascinating machines in space that we will accompany on our journeys through the universe. Each has its own incredible story to tell. For now, though, Let the idea of that one shining point in the night sky be enough. A point that once carried the hope and ingenuity of humanity. It is no longer there, but its light, its story, continues to shine in everything that came after it. Let this gentle, fading light carry you into your dreams.
That was today's night lesson. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Good night and sleep well.